Rockfin here.
I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Sunday, guys. Welcome to Sabby Podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest today is Senator Jamie Eldridge. He is a senator here in Massachusetts, and he is here to discuss two pieces of legislation. One of them is public banking, and the other one is Medicare for all. Jamie, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, Sabrina, thanks for having me on. Great to be on the podcast, and very happy to talk about these bills, which I think are very interconnected in terms of economic and racial inequality and trying to combat that. So great to be on.
Awesome. So before we get into these two pieces of legislation, I want to start with the public banking bill. We've been talking about public banks on this show for quite a while. The interest came about from a friend of the show, Roger Meadows. He was the one that kind of educated me about public banks, particularly about the Public Bank of North Dakota. But I'm curious, why do you feel this particular issue is incredibly important?
Yeah, well, the involvement in how I got to filing this public bank bill, which I will say this is just the second session it's been filed. So it really was an idea for many years. Now about 10 years ago, I co-chaired what was called the Asset Development Commission, which revealed that the vast majority of Massachusetts residents were really just a month's paycheck loss away from not being able to pay for rent, for food, for other costs. That most Massachusetts residents, again, a state that's among the wealthiest in the country, are quite asset poor. Didn't have savings, often don't have equity because they don't own a home. And the other piece, which was a 2006 report from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston called The Color of Wealth, which focused on the fact that in Boston, it was a focus on Boston residents, that the average wealth or equity for a white family was about $230,000, mostly tied to them owning a home. Black home ownership was literally $8 in the savings, and Latino savings was about the same. And so just a vast disparity in equity. And part of that, of course, is that poor communities tend to be either unbanked or underbanked. So you don't have banks that are willing to reach out to those communities because they're not going to make a profit. And if our community banks or our big banks are not doing that, then there's a place for the state to be involved. And so that was really the idea, is coming from an equity point of view, economic inequality, racial inequality, including around wealth. And the reality is a lot of people gain that equity by being able to buy a house, by starting a business, or just being in a community that isn't seeing the kind of investment that's needed, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's climate or infrastructure projects, and a public bank could play a role where the traditional or private banks are not interested in and are not playing a role right now.
That's right. And the study that Jamie is referring to, the Boston Globe were the ones that did that study where they found out about the net worth gap of Bostonians. And I think that's incredibly important for people to understand. Although there are a lot of wealthy people in Massachusetts, there is a huge gap when it comes to net worth. So I think that's important for people to understand. And the second piece of legislation that you have is the Medicare for All bill. Can you explain to everyone why you feel this is important?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think so many people have come to the cause of making healthcare right, which I want to be clear, of course, does not exist in America, but also does not exist in Massachusetts. I think because Massachusetts, to its credit, was a leader around comprehensive health insurance coverage that sometimes some of my colleagues, other public policy folks say, oh, healthcare is a right in Massachusetts. But, we have about the same percentage of people that, go into bankruptcy because of medical debt. We have the same complaints from the public about copays, deductibles, and a disparity of care. So I personally got involved with this because when I first started as a state senator, I actually unfortunately suffered a seizure, and so I was in the hospital, for about 6 weeks, probably about 2 or 3 months of rehab outside of being released. And I had probably $10,000 to $20,000 in bills, and I have probably among the best health insurance in the state, being a public employee. So if that's what I faced, imagine someone that has a poor or bad health insurance plan, or lives in an area where you don't have access to great health care. So that really became a passion of mine, and I really championed the cause and was fortunate a couple years later to become the lead Senate sponsor of an act to establish Medicare for All in Massachusetts. So I've filed the bill now for about 10 years, and we're trying to build up the movement. I would say that Senator Bernie Sanders' 2 campaigns for president really lifted up the issue. I think people now know what Medicare for All is. However, the path to get there, both nationally and at the state level, remains very difficult. But still in the fight, and still looking to pass the legislation and make healthcare right in Massachusetts.
Right. And I want people to understand, because I think some people, they've reached out to me about this question before. And I just want people to know that, yes, we do have Mass Health in Massachusetts, but that's not Medicare for All. In fact, Mass Health, it is income. There's like income requirements with that. So it's means tested. So I want people to understand there is no Medicare for All program in Massachusetts, because I've gotten that question a couple times before. And I think people I'm not sure why they think that, but I've heard people ask that question before, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, and Sabrina, I think what I would say about Mass Health is that Mass Health is a form of single payer. You're right; it's means tested, so obviously you're not eligible unless you're under a certain income. And I guess where I would make sort of the point about why we need to move to healthcare being a right is that you have people that have a job, and then they get laid off, so they lose their health insurance, because health insurance is generally tied to employment in this country. And then they're applying to Mass Health. There's lots of bureaucratic delays because it's not funded well enough. There's a lot of paperwork involved. Often they call legislators for support. What an incredibly inefficient system, where if you took Medicare, generally seen as very comprehensive, universal coverage, and expanding that to all Massachusetts residents, separating healthcare or health insurance from your employment, so that whatever happens in your life, whether you get laid off, whether you're a college student, whether you're someone that has unique healthcare challenges, the government is directly paying for those bills, and most importantly, doctors can provide the care they think is necessary for you as a patient. So that's the vision, and Mass Health is a form of single payer, but imagine if it was expanded so that everybody was covered under Medicare for All in Massachusetts.
That's right. So let's dive into the public banking bill. So it says here, an act to establish a Massachusetts public bank, and it says what would it do? So I want to dive into this piece here and make this a little bit larger. Establishing a public bank wholly owned by the Commonwealth requires the public bank to use its resources to fill pressing and unmet capital gaps in underserved communities, women and minority-owned small businesses and farms, municipalities experiencing underinvestment, housing and worker co-ops. And I'm one of those people who's really passionate about worker co-ops.
Me too. Yep.
And community scale climate investments. Can we talk a little bit about this?
Sure. All of those things, or?
Yes.
Okay. Absolutely. Well, I think that list is a pretty solid list of where there's gaps for loans, for grants, for where the state and federal government is not providing support. So you look at, underserved communities, and, I mentioned earlier that Federal Reserve Bank of Boston report around called The Color of Wealth, is that, part of that is that, unfortunately, when you go into a lot of low-income communities, disproportionately often, people of color, say in Boston, is that there's no banks. There's no Bank of America. There's no community banks, because there's been a decision at the top of the ranks that it's not profitable. It's not a good place to have a bank, and so that means that people that are saving their money, that want to buy a house, whether in the community or somewhere else, they want to start a business, just automatically have that barrier to getting access to capital. So underserved communities is a really big challenge around banking and loans and grants. The same goes for women and minority-owned small businesses. Study after study shows that people that have the same business plan, the same investments, savings, ideas around starting a business, that there continues to be massive discrimination in the private banking community as far as who gets those loans and who doesn't. Excuse me. So a public bank would address that. Municipalities experiencing underinvestment. I have a number of small rural communities that want to take action around housing, around transportation investments, but often the state dollars, the federal dollars don't reach them. And a public bank could provide the funding for a project, whether it's, improved bus service, whether it's, a rail trail, whether it's addressing transportation gaps that will really expand the opportunities for those communities. Housing and working cooperatives. Sabrina, I'm so glad to hear you're so passionate about that. I've really seen the benefit of housing co-ops in my district. My district has a number of mobile home parks where the tenants were really an afterthought by the property owner. Not good upkeep, raising the rent pretty regularly, unsafe conditions. And so I've now helped about 3 mobile home parks come together, tenants coming together, and with the help of a cooperative, actually purchasing the park from the owner. And now they get to decide. They're in charge about what the rent is, what the upkeep is, about the conditions, and probably most importantly for them, they get to remain in their homes and not be bought out by a venture capitalist. So the idea is that with a public bank, it could provide this capital up front. And I want to be clear, this isn't about grants. These are loans, but the money isn't being put forward by the private banks. And so a public bank could provide that money up front and have it be paid back to create more cooperatives in a state where we're facing a massive housing and affordable housing crisis. And then on community scale climate investments, we don't have a dedicated revenue source in Massachusetts for climate projects. That could be electrifying, more homes, more businesses, schools. It could be addressing the concerns around floods or heat waves, which are increasing. And yet right now, despite some new state grants, a lot of them don't go all the way to build these climate projects. And so climate projects would be eligible under this public bank. So again, you see a lot of gaps, and I think that this bill would fill a lot of those gaps for people across Massachusetts.
That's right. And I want to add something about the banks. It's really important that people understand. So if I were to go to Roxbury, for example, you may have a difficult time finding a bank in Roxbury. So then those residents would have to go to another Boston neighborhood that does have a bank to try to get a loan. But then that is connected back to that study that came from the Boston Globe about net worth, because if you don't have any collateral, then the banks don't really want to give you a loan. So this is, all of this is connected, is what I want people to understand. And then this portion here establishes that the public bank will support rather than compete with private banks. And that piece I think is really important, because some people assume, well, if we have a public bank, isn't that going to compete with like Bank of America? No, Bank of America will be just fine.
Bank of America will be just fine, record profits year after year. And again, let's remember the reason there's this gap, right, is because the big banks, or even a lot of the community banks, they're not interested to provide, loans for the projects that I just talked about. So it's not in competition with them. Would love to see those, banks be more proactive for these more sort of community-minded projects, but they're not interested in them. They're making record profits right now. Why not establish a public bank to establish this equity, the greater opportunity for residents across Massachusetts, and for a lot of cities and towns that want to do the right thing on climate, on housing, on transportation infrastructure, but right now are unable to get state grants or federal funding to do that.
That's right. And subjects the public bank to prudential supervision by the MA Division of Banks, such that the public bank will comply with the same rules applying to private banks chartered in the Commonwealth. That's another question that I've received from people too. Are they going to have the same rules? And I think it's important for people to understand, like, there's so many things that you can do if you have a public bank. Like, I talked to someone from North Dakota not too long ago, and she explained to me, like, this is why they've been able to pass a lot of legislation in North Dakota, is because they don't have to ask, okay, where's the money going to come from for these initiatives? They don't have to ask that question because they have the Bank of North Dakota, which is a public bank. So this could actually help states a lot. I think more states should put forth this type of legislation, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, North Dakota was established during the, 1910s, 1920s progressive era, actually led by a lot of farmers. That created, municipal power plants, this state bank, a lot of cooperatives. And so I think with the increasing inequality in America, which, by the way, has significantly intensified as a result of the pandemic, wealthy people got wealthier. The rest of us, lost equity. The incomes did not go up. A lot of other costs did go up. So it really is a key piece to combating inequality in America, and of course in Massachusetts. And again, for those who are following the podcast from outside of Massachusetts, Massachusetts, strong social safety net, generally in a better state than many other states economically, and yet the inequality gap is one of the biggest in the country. It's in the top 10. So you have a growing group of wealthy individuals, but the working class, those who are less well off, and even many people in the middle class are seeing their earnings going down, their buying power going down. And again, no one proposal is a solution or a panacea to all this, but I do think a public bank would be a significant sort of option to combat inequality throughout Massachusetts.
I agree. And here's a good question here from Jessica. I'm not familiar with public banks. How can you tell if a bank is public? Only a few states have them. The only one I know of is the Bank of North Dakota, but that's a good question.
Right. If you're in North Dakota, then you have a public bank. If you're in another state, you don't. There are some, there's in Massachusetts, for example, there's quasi-public agencies that provide, some loans. There's something called the Mass Capital Growth Corporation, which does provide small loans. Some chambers of commerce do micro lending, but the reality is that they tend to benefit overwhelmingly middle class, upper middle class individuals or businesses. So it's very hard for working class people, for a lot of immigrants, for those who are less well off, who have a great idea, or a city or town that's not very wealthy but can't get access to this capital, and really a lot of gaps there. So So yeah, there's no other public bank aside from North Dakota. We'd love Massachusetts to be number 2. And it's really been a really impressive grassroots coalition over the past 4 years that's put this together. And we're excited for this session.
And the other piece here is provides funding for the public bank's 1.6 billion in assets by appropriating 200 million in capital equity over a period of 4 years. So that's 50 million each, and requiring the state treasurer, to hold deposits at an annual average of 1.4 billion in the public bank. The amount will be transferred from balances currently held at the Massachusetts Municipal Depository Trust, with no impact on Massachusetts private banks. So again, for those wondering, this would not have an impact on the private banks. I think that's important.
Absolutely. And I think I appreciate you citing that, because I think it's also important to remember what that means is that a lot of our state reserves are in the big banks. A lot of them are in the Bank of America. A lot of them are in large banks that, to be honest, aren't really creating that many jobs in Massachusetts, aren't really providing many benefits to many Massachusetts residents. Why not take that money and put it into our public bank system, where the dollars are going to stay local? And we know that there's more of a public mission than the big banks, including a bank like Bank of America is right now.
100%. Yesterday, I recorded an interview. We're moving on to the Medicare for All piece with Mass Care. So it's the organization here. I know you know who they are, but for people watching, organization here in Massachusetts, and these volunteers have been trying to get some type of single payer established here in Massachusetts. And this goes hand in hand with Jamie's bill, the Medicare for All bill. And one of the things they mentioned to me yesterday, because I was asking them, like, have you spoken to these politicians? Have you done videos? I think video testimonials are incredibly powerful if you can get people who have had like bad experiences in reference to medical debt. And you would need a lot of people, not just like 1 or 2 people. So we were talking about like strategy, things that can go around that. And what they made pretty clear to me yesterday is that it seems like there are 2 people in particular. I know Cindy Friedman is one of them. And it seems like they are gatekeepers in a way that even if other politicians may agree with it, it seems like if you can't convince those 2 people, her, and I forget the other person's name, but I think it's one in the House and one in the Senate. But it seems like if you can't change their mind, then this is why the legislation is not being brought to the floor for a vote. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I would respectfully push back on that a bit, because I think the thing is that I think sometimes in the Medicare for All movement, there's a quick assumption that it's just a couple of key policymakers that are the reason that we're not making progress on making healthcare right. And I don't think it really is. I think it's really convincing a majority of legislators, as well as the governor, our new governor, Maura Healey, to get behind making healthcare right. Senator Friedman, who is the just recently reappointed Senate chair of the Healthcare Finance Committee, she's done a tremendous job to find different ways to expand healthcare under our current system. I think the point that Mass Care and myself and others make is that the system itself is broken. If you're just working around the edges, you're not going to address the massive healthcare costs for Massachusetts. You're not going to address the co-pays, deductibles, and premiums that are really crushing on families' budgets. And so the challenge is that to get more legislators to really advocate for making healthcare right, to pass single payer. That can be forums. That can be, as you said, Sabrina, people telling their stories, including all the terrible stories from the pandemic. You talk about a broken public health system. You talk about people that have long COVID or long-term COVID that have these incredibly expensive bills right now. And obviously in Massachusetts, the tens of thousands of deaths of people from COVID, some of which I do believe could have been prevented, under a Medicare for All system, a more responsive system. So I think it is, it's not just any particular individual legislator. It's really about, getting more legislators to be strong supporters, not just to say that they co-sponsor the bill, but that they're going to do a forum in their district. They're going to fight for making healthcare right. And, by the way, what are the things we can do this session to move towards that healthcare as a right model, even if we're not able to pass the full bill?
Well said. So I want to show everyone a part of the bill here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think it logged me out, but Eric, I have to log back in to type and see. What I noticed yesterday also with Mass Care when I was speaking to them was that they also informed me that this would actually save the state at least approximately $34 billion if we had a Medicare for all system here in Massachusetts. So this would actually save the state money for those watching. And so for me, I'm watching the news, the local news, and I'm seeing the reporters are saying that people are fleeing Massachusetts ever since the start of the pandemic because of the cost of living. And some of the small businesses have closed as well. In fact, a lot of the small businesses have closed permanently because they were shut down during the pandemic and couldn't recoup the money there. But this is another thing to push, is that we have people leaving the state because it's expensive to live here. And then on top of that, people have medical debt because they either are underinsured, they're not insured, or just because the cost of healthcare is extremely expensive. And this would save the state money. So you would think something like this, like I'm thinking, if Massachusetts was first, and we don't have to be first, but we've done a lot of firsts in the state, because we were the first to legalize gay marriage. We were the first to legalize cannabis. Like Obamacare came from technically Massachusetts. It was Obamacare.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Imagine if we were the first ones to implement Medicare for all, and everyone can go back to and say, well, it came from Massachusetts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And the savings are spot on because, Massachusetts, again, has arguably the best healthcare in the world for those that can afford to pay it, and most of us can't. And that's a distinction. But it's also the most expensive healthcare in the world. So we're the most expensive in the country, and the U.S. spends the most dollars per capita, with arguably some of the worst outcomes for a developed country. We have the lowest mortality rate for a developed country, the highest infant mortality rate, and we have a record number of bankruptcies through medical debt. So the savings, of course, because people say, well, where are the savings? The savings are from, think about all of the paperwork when any one of us goes to the doctor, all the paperwork that, the person behind the scenes at the medical clinic or the medical center or practice is filling out, to get approval or to get a bill paid by the health insurance company. You think about all of the ways that, often sort of high-end hospitals or practices focus on areas of healthcare that really aren't that needed in the state. Another MRI machine, another, CAT scan, even, get into things like plastic surgery that really are delivering, healthcare improvements. But because those things pay better, that's where the money is being invested versus pediatricians in every community in Massachusetts, public health experts, and our community hospitals, which, by the way, are closing, are shutting down their psych wards. They're, at risk of financial calamity. So it's really reached a crisis. And again, just sort of nibbling around at the edges, just sort of saying we're going to have some modest expansions around, health insurance coverage is not going to address the costs or the care for millions of residents across Massachusetts.
That's right. And one of the things it says here, benefits of a Medicare for all system, a single payer system would save about 29% of our current spending on healthcare. Take the burden of rising healthcare costs off of most small businesses, municipalities, and families, eliminate medical debt and medical bankruptcy, and guarantee access to quality, affordable healthcare as a right for all residents of the Commonwealth. And what I like here is that you even have the roadmap to transition, because this is another piece where sometimes people will present bills, but they don't tell you how to get there. Like they say, this is what we want, but they don't tell you how to get it. And it says the 29-member board trustees, including but not limited to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Administration and Finance, the Commissioner of Public Health, and 2 single-payer advocates will be tasked with establishing clear processes to transition to Medicare for all. So let's talk about that for a second, because Blue Cross Blue Shield, they're huge here.
Yep.
One of the questions that came up for, at least for Bernie Sanders, was what happens to all of the employees that work for healthcare companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna? How would that transition work?
Yeah, so part of our bill would establish a trust for money to go into to retrain people. And, first of all, if you want to talk to someone who generally is unhappy with their job, talk to someone who's processing insurance claims, often denying, health insurance claims from patients. So it's not, it's one of those jobs that, again, it's not, respectfully producing a lot, contributing a lot to society. Imagine if that person was able to go back and get retrained in nursing school, become a doctor, become a public health expert, nutritionist, and actually contribute to improving people's healthcare outcomes versus finding different ways to deny coverage. So the bill does have a trust fund that would retrain, workers. Those that sort of raise this issue, which I think sometimes can be a bit of a straw man argument, because what I hear from each and every day about the need to make government more efficient, the need to make different systems more efficient. Well, our healthcare system is arguably the most inefficient system. You talk about health insurance companies, third party providers, all of the administration in a hospital or medical center, and a lot of that could be eliminated, which I think is a good thing. Create an efficient system, and then train those people to be more productive. Look, Massachusetts electrified its turnpike system, the toll system.
Yep.
There are no more toll collectors. I think most people would agree that toll collectors weren't really necessary. And now you have a better system, and the individuals that were toll collectors were retrained to find other jobs. In a similar vein, I think that needs to happen in our healthcare system, and it's going to create better jobs that are more satisfying for people across the state.
So one question I have, this leads into ballot initiatives, because this is something where we looked at these 2 bills and we were wondering, could we try to put forth a ballot measure for either one of these bills? We did have a meeting with you, but for those who are watching in the audience, can you please explain to everyone the cost? Because I think this is the factor that a lot of people may not consider. How much do you estimate that it would cost us to try to run a ballot initiative for public bank, for example?
Yeah, and I think Massachusetts we're blessed to be in a state with a referendum process that that voters, that citizens can collect signatures to bring something to the ballot, so people can vote on it. And we actually recently passed a millionaire's tax to increase the tax on those who earn over $1 million a year. And it's going to create about $1 billion a year for transportation and education investments. Just that campaign, both sides, including, wealthy individuals, corporations, spent tens of millions of dollars. And so I think the thing that's important to realize about, the public bank bill is that, unfortunately, still the Mass Bankers Association, the trade group that represents pretty much all banks, has expressed its opposition to the public bank bill. Even though I do not think it's competition, they see it as competition. They see it as a precedent. And the fear is that if we went to the ballot, that banks, again, not just in Massachusetts, but, you think about a Bank of America or, Santander or other banks, they would likely pour millions of dollars in Massachusetts to, unfortunately, do misleading campaigns and perhaps scare voters to voting against this referendum. And so, unfortunately, and we saw this with the millionaire's tax, is that if you're going to put forth a referendum on a progressive policy, whether it's making healthcare a right, whether it's public bank, whether it's taxing the rich, is that you've got to have, often through labor unions, often through progressive groups, you've got to have the revenue to get out your message to win the day. And just to put sort of a fine point on that, the millionaire's tax, which was polling about 2-1, most people actually agree that wealthy people don't pay enough in taxes, but on the final vote in November, it passed just by about 5 percentage points. So something that had a lot of support, good populist policy, just barely passed in Massachusetts. So I think, I know we had that meeting. It's important to talk about the realities of a referendum, about the public bank, about Medicare for all, or other progressive policies and the corporate interests that would oppose it in the millions of dollars they would likely spend.
Yeah. So for people who are not in a BI state, for example, with the dental insurance question that came out, what they'll do is they'll send flyers to us in the mail. One will say, vote yes on question 1. The other one will say reasons why you need to vote no on question 1. And what I think is important to pay attention to when you receive those is who is actually supporting it and who's opposed to it. So for the dental insurance question, that flyer that went out that said to vote no, if you looked at the list of supporters, it was all the insurance companies. So of course they don't want you to vote for that. But that's really important and that's key. And they will run those campaigns. Like I saw those ads like nonstop. Don't vote for it. Don't do it. I saw the same thing with right to repair. Same thing with legalizing marijuana, although that still did pass. And the millionaire tax one, I believe that was the second time this was ran as a ballot measure, if I'm not mistaken. I think they ran it before, but it didn't pass.
It's actually, Sabrina, it was the 5th time in the past 40 years that it was on the ballot. So it was defeated 4 previous times. So it finally passed this time. And just a point of pride on that, you noted that on the mailers, the disclosures, that was a bill that I got passed, 10 years ago after the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, just to say that if corporations are going to spend money on mailings on TV, that they had to disclose the source of that money in every ad or mailing. So that's because of a bill we passed, the Disclose Act, but it doesn't stop the money from flowing, and it will flow in here from across the country, I think, on a public bank or Medicare for all. So we have to get, ideally passage through the legislature, or if we're going to go to the ballot, we really have to have a plan to raise the money to get out our message.
Right. So we would need like a grassroots coalition, like a strong grassroots movement. I interviewed activists before from Washington State. They were trying to do the same thing there. They're called Whole Washington, and they have another group that worked with them called the Red Berets. And they were actually collecting the signatures to try to get, I think in Washington State, it's a ridiculous number of amount of signatures that they needed for that. But they didn't end up reaching that goal by December. Now, part of that was the pandemic hurt them with that because it has to be a wet signature. And they couldn't go around door to door to get as many if they would have been if it wasn't for the pandemic. But they've been in this fight, and they know, how hard it can be and what it takes to at least even get it on the ballot. Like that's the tough part. And then there's the wording that I think people can be tripped up by. I go back to 2020 and we had the question about ranked choice voting, which to me, I thought was a no-brainer. But after talking to people, a lot of people just didn't understand the question, so they voted against it.
Right. They got confused. When people get confused, they tend to vote no. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. 100%.
Absolutely. And I will say last year I was very involved with the driver's license law for undocumented immigrants, which the legislature actually passed. But then conservative activists got it on the ballot to repeal it. But what was confusing about the messaging was that to keep the law was yes, and to repeal it was no. And we had to raise money to get out that message too, because I think initially a lot of people that supported the driver's license law thought, oh, well, I'm going to vote no because I want to oppose the repeal. But again, to your point, Sabrina, the message, the wording of the ballot was, do you reaffirm the legislature passing this law? So we had to get the word out. That did pass, but that was also pretty close.
Yes. When we went through the ballot measures, because we've done them for every state, I think we stopped at Massachusetts. So I'll be doing Missouri next. But that question for Massachusetts about the driver's license, like even when I read it on the show, people were confused. Like people in the chat were like, so do we vote yes or no? Like, yeah, I think the wording is very important. And then the other thing too, I think that people have to understand is this all goes back to corporate money. And so one of the things that we have talked about, myself and Roger and with Betsy as well, is it possible in Massachusetts to run a BI to get corporate money out of electoral politics, at least on the local level? And do you think that would be successful?
Yeah, what's heartbreaking, I don't want to give another downer, but because the Supreme Court, obviously the federal Supreme Court, has ruled that money is free speech, that you can't limit how much money can be spent, including with the disastrous 2010 Citizens United decision. You could not at the state or local level, limit or regulate. You can regulate a little in terms of reporting, but you can't limit corporate money going into a ballot campaign. And so that literally means Bank of America could spend $50 million if the public bank referendum was up in Massachusetts. They could spend an unlimited amount of money because, very disappointingly, the majority of our Supreme Court has said that money is free speech. And therefore, even though someone who's a multi-billionaire has infinitely more power and political power than someone, who's working or middle class, they concluded that somehow money was the same as free speech and therefore protected under the First Amendment.
Where does have you heard from Elizabeth Warren about this? Where does she stand on these two bills? Just curious.
Yeah, we have reached out to Senator Warren about the public bank bill because an issue that she has championed at the national level, which is sort of similar, is actually to establish banking in post offices. So, the post office, obviously, a sort of public institution, that is something that she has championed. So it's a little different from a purely public bank, but we are reaching out to her to get her support. She's been, I think, a national leader on, taxation issues, on corporate power issues. So we hope to get her support as well as, the entire congressional delegation. But really right now it's reaching out to individual state legislators. The bill will go to the Financial Services Committee. We have a Senate chair, Senator Paul Feeney, who is a great labor leader, great progressive Democrat on a lot of economic issues. So I've talked to him already about the bill, and I know that he was supportive of the bill last session.
Okay, here's a question I think that's really good because this one has come up before too from Mastermind Hour. Find a local credit union. So in reference to credit unions and a public bank, do you feel a credit union would be better than the regular private banks like Bank of America? Probably so. But when you compare the two, what would you say is the difference between like the credit union and a public bank?
Yeah, and credit unions, do provide generally a better service to their customers, which tend to be, industry or community specific. So I have found that credit unions are generally providing, a more community-minded, service and more community-minded lending to a community or area than the private banks. However, a credit union still has the same profit motive. They still, unfortunately, are not filling the gaps that we found and those areas that you highlighted earlier. So, there's still disproportionate lack of credit unions and banks in poor communities. There's still a lot of communities that would like to get, loans for infrastructure projects. And unfortunately, again, the proof is in the pudding is that, those loans are not being provided to communities or individuals or entrepreneurs. And that's why we need this public bank to fill those gaps.
Do you know where Mayor Wu stands on these two issues? Because I know she has put forth a new affordable housing plan, although I have criticisms there too, because I feel like when I look at some of the affordable housing listed on boston.gov website, I don't feel like the $4,000 a month is affordable. I don't feel like that's affordable at all. And then she's also started a reparations task force. So she seems to be a little bit at least open to hearing these issues. Have you heard from her on where she feels about these two pieces of legislation?
I have not on on these two bills. I mean, Mayor Wu is doing uh, uh, fighting the good fight on so many fronts, including the recent rent control proposal, which would have to be approved by the legislature, even for Boston. So we'll certainly do our outreach, but I do think at the end of the day, it's about reaching out across the state to your state rep and state senator. Without significant support from legislators, even to have sort of progressive leaders like a Mayor Wu or Senator Warren will only go so far. We saw that with the driver's license bill. We saw that with the millionaire's tax, is that it really was a sort of union-led, led by a lot of leaders of color, a lot of immigrants on those issues, convincing their legislators to support those bills. So I go back to the fact that it's tough work, but that organizing needs to happen in every single legislative district, and that's our approach as the session has begun.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely wanted to mention her because I know she's been trying to do I guess I would say she's been trying to do measures that were not tried under Mayor Walsh or Mayor Menino. So it seems like she's trying to do some things in that area. So I think I wanted to make sure like if she does not know about these things, because I want to try to talk to her as well to get her eye on these, because I think that she does have a strong voice and I think she could help in a sense, so to speak. But I think that the other issue I was going to mention to you in reference to Massachusetts, especially starting with the pandemic, there's been an influx of people leaving Eastern Massachusetts. For those who don't know, that's the Boston area, and moving towards Western Mass, especially those who are trying to buy a home. And if that continues, then what you're going to see happen is gentrification is going to be taking place in Western Massachusetts, because it's like you pick up from one place and you just go to another place and then the same thing happens. This has been happening all across the country. What do you think should be done in reference to the housing issue that we have in the state, especially the Boston area? It's just really expensive. And do you feel that something like affordable housing is going far enough? Because I think I've lived here for a little over 11 years now, and I've just continued to watch the rent just increase.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, housing is such a massive task, and so much of it is influenced by the market and where people want to live, which I think for a variety of reasons, perhaps most significantly because there's so much job growth in Eastern Mass, that's why you have so many people continuing to move to Eastern Mass. Though there is the Globe reported an exodus of a relatively small amount of people leaving because of the housing prices. But the reality is, when there's a new housing development, whether in my district, which is Metro West / Central Mass, or closer to Boston, Somerville, or Cambridge, those units are filling up, generally by people that are quite well off. And so we really need to address the housing crisis. I think it is a multi-pronged approach. I am the Senate sponsor of the local option rent control bill. So I do think we need to get the rent increases under control for communities that want to have that pass locally, like Boston or Cambridge or Somerville. I think that public housing plays a really critical role for low-income residents. We need to provide more state and federal funding to public housing. Look, the reality is there's a lot of people that might not have the savings to buy a home, but obviously everyone deserves a safe place to live, and I think public housing provides a real place for that. And then I think the what's just begun to be implemented is this housing choice / transit-oriented housing, where the communities can approve denser housing developments, more apartments. There's requirements on housing being placed near, MBTA train stations or commuter rail stops. So that's an area where I think we could make a dent. But, and this is in some ways where the public bank could come in, is that, you made the point about, the looking at these listings of affordable housing and they're, $3,000 or $4,000 a month. How is that affordable? Is that's really an area where, I think a public bank and just more state, support is that you've got to make sure that there's the restrictions, that there's the commitment to how do we get rental housing that's, $900 a month, $1,000 a month? How do we get the houses that are $200,000 to $300,000 to buy for a family? Because if housing that's affordable is $500,000 to buy, if it's, $2,500 a month to rent, that's not affordable to most working families. And it's an incredible frustration. I think the public bank could make a difference. I think just generally deeper subsidies, including, more vouchers like Section 8 or MRVP, but it's really a multi-pronged approach. Our Governor Healy, has made it a top issue. She's going to appoint, hopefully by this summer, a housing secretary, but I do think we need an aggressive legislative agenda of all the things I talked about to really make a dent in the housing crisis in Massachusetts.
Agreed. Bizarro Joe said gentrification already ramping up here in Worcester, Sabby. Yeah. So the last time I was in Worcester, I noticed a big difference. It's that's what I was saying. Like people pick up and they just move to another city and it just spreads and it continues. One more question for you, Jamie, in reference to home ownership, because I've seen some other states kind of do programs for people who may be, I don't know if I want to say working class, but they make under a certain income. They've implemented programs to help them be able to get a path to home ownership. Do you foresee something like that, or has anyone put forth any type of legislation in the state house for that in Massachusetts, so that people that live in some of these neighborhoods like Roxbury and JP, et cetera, that they have a path to home ownership and they're not forever renters?
Great question. And we did use, and I give former Governor Baker credit on this, is that the advocates went to our previous governor, Charlie Baker, and said, there's a distinct decrease or lack of home ownership, specifically in the Black community. And he put a lot of money into a lot of different housing agencies to increase that. And it did increase. So I really give him credit for that. That was a lot of the ARPA dollars, which is, as far as we can tell, have mostly been spent. And so, this gets back to, you need a dedicated source of revenue. I filed a bill called the HERO Act, Housing Environment Revenue Opportunities Act. And it would, through a deeds excise fee, when people buy their house, it would raise about $300 million. Half of that would be for climate resiliency in communities. Half it would be for affordable housing, and it could be for homeownership opportunities. So we have a real richness of CDCs, community development corporations, throughout Massachusetts that are creating these homeownership opportunities for housing that's, $250,000, $300,000, that often is accessible for working families. So there's the sort of institutions there's the programs, but there does need to be greater funding. And my fear is, with ARPA money, mostly gone, with the pandemic money having been spent, is unless we have a dedicated revenue source, that those programs will start to get cut, and the progress we made over the past 2 years will be reversed.
That's right. That's what very well said, Jamie. I think people really need to understand that those pandemic funds only go so far. So when it's gone, it's like you need to find a way to replace that revenue. In reference to the housing thing, the pandemic, I think, helped me out a lot because the interest rates decreased dramatically. And I was like, this is it. This is my moment. This is my moment. So that's how that helped me get on the path to home ownership. But I think if it wasn't for the pandemic, like right now, I think I would still be in my apartment in Somerville. I really do. Like, I don't know how I would have been able to, at that point in time, but I lied, Jamie. One more question. Are you familiar with the crisis that happened in Libby, Montana, in reference to how they obtained Medicare for all?
I am not. No, and that's a city in Montana, or? I am not. I would, we're looking for examples of success, because I will say the Medicare for All movement has had a tough couple of years. Appreciate the work of President Biden, but he very clearly does not support Medicare for All. And I think it's been difficult even for progressives in Congress to move the bill forward.
That's right. So Libby, Montana, they actually had an asbestos issue in the mines. And so it affected, this isn't a big town, but it affected the people in the community. So they were actually able to plead to President Obama at the time that we need to give everyone in Libby, Montana health care because they were exposed to the asbestos here from the mines. Actually, people in East Palestine, Ohio could do the same thing right now. I don't know if they know this, but they could do the same thing and say, we were exposed to the chemicals from the train derailment. They could do that too. So technically, if you go back to the pandemic, the start of the pandemic or the height of the pandemic, technically every state in this country could make that same plea for universal health care because of they were exposed to the virus and how it affected the state and the economy and health insurance for them.
That's a great argument. And I'll be honest, I'm frustrated that more people that went through the pandemic that had negative health outcomes, obviously tragic losses to their families. I wish there were more voices, from those individuals and families speaking out in support of single payer, because I think that would be a very powerful argument to make progress on Medicare for All in Massachusetts and across the country.
Agreed. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Sabrina, thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate your work and always glad to come on. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys so you can understand how things move in the state house. Because at the end of the day, I think the toughest part is that you still have to pass legislation. And it always comes back to that, right? So that's the tough part. But I hope Jamie was very knowledgeable for you there. Let me go ahead and take that comment on Rockfin, Eric, and then I'll get to the chat. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Dave. Thanks for hosting, Sabs. Good luck to Senator Eldridge, but we got to shake things up, appropriate the banks outside of Boston. State should regulate and take money, but especially real estate control from big mass banks. As much as able, this underbanked language with Paul Grogan type MFS swinging through the hood has got to stop. Thank you so much for that, Dave. And thank you for the tip, Roger Meadows. You are going to fight big money, whether you go through the legislative process or the CBI process. As hard as it might be to get progressive initiatives on the ballot in CBI states, it's not as hard as it is in New York State, where we have none. Let's get this grassroots funding. That's right. And for those of you, even if you don't live in Massachusetts, but you still would like to try to help, you're welcome to. We would not turn you away. We would not say you cannot help us because you don't live here. No, not going to happen. All right. I want to give a quick shout out to Sabby patrons. And I do want to go through the thumbnail to tell you the other stories that we're going to cover today, as well as I'm going to explain to you why it's so difficult to get BIs passed in Massachusetts. Even though we've passed great ballot measures, we are one of the more difficult states, believe it or not, to get these measures passed in. So shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Guys, thank you so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories. I still got to fix this. We're going to have to figure that out. I don't know what happened there. Members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are scrolling across the bottom of the screen there. And you can also see their names here as well. Thank you guys so much. Again, I really do appreciate your support. It really does help me out here because we have to pay for all of these things that we use, believe it or not. All right. What are we going to talk about today, or actually almost tonight? Let's go ahead and get into that thumbnail, guys. I have some pretty interesting stories today. 2 of them are actually connected. Sometimes I like to do that. All right, we are going to discuss Jimmy Dore goes off. Jimmy Dore actually goes off about the war economy. He was on Tucker Carlson. Again, this was the recent interview he had with Tucker Carlson. So we're going to take a deep dive into that. I'm also going to discuss Malcolm X lawsuit. Yes, you heard that correct. No, Malcolm X is no longer alive. But something huge has happened, and I think we need to discuss how the alphabet letter agencies have played a role when it comes to the assassination of MLK and what his family is trying to do about it now. We're also going to discuss Germany protests. This is huge. This is in reference to Russia and Ukraine. And I want to talk about this because I want to show you how Germany is affected by the energy crisis right now, but also how they can get so many people out in the streets. We need to look to countries like Germany and Denmark to see how they're doing this. And of course, Senator Eldridge was just here talking about his public banking bill and his Medicare for All bill. Really quickly, though, I do want to explain to you why it is so incredibly difficult to get ballot measures passed in Massachusetts. You know, thanks to Roger Meadows for this. We are not a direct ballot initiative state. So people have to understand that we are indirect. So it says Massachusetts creates extra step to screw that multiple military obstacle courses that goes beyond just being an indirect state. Most indirect CBI states just means it goes before the legislature after a successful petition drive, and the legislative branch must decide to either adopt as is with no amending it, or if they reject it, then it automatically goes on the ballot for voters to decide for passage if law or ratification of an amendment. Initiated state statutes. After voters collect enough valid signatures for a CBI to go on the ballot as a state statute, it then may be adopted by the legislator. And once passed by a majority vote in both houses, it then becomes law. If it is not adopted, then proponents must collect a second round of signatures totaling 0.5% of the votes last cast for governor, excluding blanks. So see, this extra step here can make it difficult if it's not adopted. Initiated constitutional amendments. Following the submission of enough signatures, it goes to the Massachusetts legislature for approval, where only 25% is required following 2 successive joint sessions, whether they fall within the same term, the 2 years in between an election, or separate terms, 2 consecutive years with an election in between. To reach the ballot for voter ratification, no secondary batch of signatures is required. However, when a citizen proposed amendment is placed before the legislator by voters, lawmakers with a 3/4 supermajority vote called into joint session can amend the proposed amendment. That's the tough part. They can still come in and amend it. So that's why it makes it a little bit more difficult here. In Massachusetts, citizens also have the power to repeal legislation via veto referendum. The Massachusetts General Court, aka the legislative branch, can also place measures on the ballot as legislatively referred constitutional amendments. Then we get to the piece here about the deadline for signature collections. For initiated statutes, signature collections for initiated statutes, which are state laws, in Massachusetts are collected in 2 circulation periods. The first period runs from the 3rd Wednesday in September to 2 weeks prior to the 1st Wednesday in December. The legislature must act on the petition by the 1st Wednesday of May. If the proposed law is not adopted, then the second period to collect signatures starts from the day after the 1st Wednesday of May and ends the 1st Wednesday of July. And the example that Roger used was the medical dental ratio citizen ballot initiative. That one passed hugely. I think that was over 80%. It passed. And so the example here, it says question 2 was filed by Dr. Mahab on August 3rd, 2021. September 1st, 2021, the Attorney General cleared the initiative for signature gathering. So you see, this is a multiple step process. The campaign announced that they submitted over 104,000 valid signatures to the Secretary of State's office December 1st, 2021. At the end of December, the Secretary of State certified the petition to the legislature. The state legislature did not pass the initiative before the May deadline. The campaign was cleared to gather a second round of signatures. On July 7th, the state elections office reported that the initiative had filed a second round of signatures. And on July 14th, the Secretary of State informed the campaign they had qualified for the ballot. So do you guys see there's multiple steps to it here in Massachusetts? Now, for those of you that live in ballot initiative states that have direct, what do you call it? Are direct states, not indirect, we're indirect. You don't have to go through all this. So it's actually amazing that we've been able to still pass as much as we've passed. I'm just keeping it real. So Roger had some commentary here. He said, what? That is less than 3 months to collect signatures for each period to get on the ballot. Yes. And that's why it can be so difficult for some people, because you have a short time. Now, with initiated constitutional amendments, the signature deadline for initiated amendments also goes from the third Wednesday in September to 2 weeks prior to the first Wednesday in December. The initiative will be brought up for a vote in the legislative branch the following year at the end of spring and voted on by the middle of summer. It is either approved by 25% of both legislators, which is required to go on the ballot, or not. No second round of signatures required. So it's actually easier to do a constitutional amendment. And that's what Roger has been trying to tell people. Try to do the constitutional amendment because you don't have to go through that second round. There's that, you can skip that step. Now, Roger said here in the commentary, again, what? Such a short period of time to gather signatures, with the government being the ultimate decision maker on whether or not if what the voters want to get to go on the ballot actually goes on the ballot. Not if it qualifies to go on the ballot due to errors or technicalities that happen in the signature gathering process. This barrier currently sets up a final plug in the sink for stopping what the voters might want, where nothing gets on the ballot as an amendment unless the government approves it, is undemocratic. The last 2 times an amendment in Massachusetts was passed using the citizen ballot initiative process was 1972, and before that, 1934. Everything else that was passed by Bay Staters was using the CBI process to pass Massachusetts law. Yes, Massachusetts population, a little under 7 million, is less than New York City, 8.5 million, and Massachusetts has at least 5.1 million of them registered voters. But damn. Yeah, number of signatures required to get on the ballot. For an amendment or statute, submitted signatures must be 3% of votes cast for governor in the most recent gubernatorial election, excluding blanks. For veto referendum, allowing voters to repeal laws, submitted signatures must be 1.5% of the total votes cast for governor in the most recent gubernatorial election. If the petitioners submit a written request for the suspension of the targeted law prior to referendum election, signatures equal to 2% of the total votes last cast for governor are required to both suspend the law and force an election. So these things are important for people to understand. So Roger gave a little bit of commentary here, and he says this might explain why such a small time window to gather signatures, because you don't need that many signatures. I still think a larger window to gather signatures is needed. And I agree with that, because look at what happened to whole Washington when the pandemic hit. when the pandemic hit, that actually slowed down their signature gathering process. They weren't able to go out to as many people, to knock on as many doors because of the restrictions with the pandemic. So I agree with Roger there. And here's just a friendly suggestion. File a CBI regarding initiated constitutional amendments, making you like other indirect ballot initiative states, where the legislator gets to ratify what voters put before them after a successful petition drive. And should the legislative branch doing simple majority approve the measure, it will then be ratified and added to the state constitution as an amendment, and placing it on the ballot for voters to vote on would not be needed. However, if rejected, then it automatically goes on the ballot for voters to ratify instead of it just dying. Now, part 2 would be, if you are able to get part 1 ratified, then file another CBI for initiated constitutional amendment that would convert your state from an indirect state to a direct CBI state, allowing you to go completely around the government and placing your initiative directly on the ballot. And I second that. So we don't have to deal with the GOV. Okay. I second that as well. Okay. We're moving on to Germany. Now, those of you guys know, make sure my video is propped up here. Most of you guys know there was a rally in DC that I was at, that I covered, called the Rage Against the War Machine rally. Now, it was estimated there were approximately, I think they said 1,000 to 2,000 people that were there. That is the largest anti-war rally that I've been at. That is the largest rally that I've been at since the George Floyd protests. Since the George Floyd protests. So I think people have to really understand that most of these protests that I've went to and my comrades have gone to don't even get 1,000 people. Not in this country. So why are we looking at Germany? Because Germany just had a similar protest, and they are protesting against sending more arms to Ukraine. But they were able to get about 25,000 people out in the street. Check out this video. I have a couple of videos that I want to show you, but here's an overview here. You can actually see an overview of the crowd here. 25,000 people. Look at this.
Genauso sage ich auch, jeder, der ehrlichen Herzens mit uns für Friede.
Oh, and by the way, notice they have umbrellas, which means that it was raining, and they still showed up.
Und ich finde auch das möchte ich hier noch mal sagen. Melnik und auch andere Größen. Ist das für eine verlogene Debatte? Das möchte ich ja auch noch mal deutlich sagen. Hab ich auch gesagt. Ist das nicht wahr? Ja. Ja.
Yeah, they show up. And it's not just them.
Sage ich auch. Jeder.
It's not just them. Other countries in Europe, they have these same turnout numbers. Denmark had 50,000 people show up last week to protest in the streets. Now, it says here, this is from Apocalyptus. About 25,000 Berliners took to the streets to rally against arms supplies to Kyiv. People gathered on the square near Brandenburg Gate and called on Olaf Scholz to immediately stop the escalation of the conflict. The event was organized. Let me click on here because it doesn't show her full name. That's Sarah Wagenknecht. I believe Glenn Greenwald interviewed her recently. I think this is the woman that Glenn Greenwald interviewed, because I think there was a translator, or she needed a translator or something like that. So it was organized by her and Alice Schwarzer. Alice doesn't have her picture there. Now, there's more. So again, Similar message. Similar message that we had in DC. 25,000 people out in the streets. Now, some of this goes to the fact that they are directly affected in ways that we're not affected. For example, they do have the energy crisis that they are going through right now, which is problematic. I told you guys what was happening to people in the UK where they were having to go to warm banks just to get heat because they can't afford to pay their heating bill. They are really affected by the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So that could be part of it. But even when it's not this particular situation, they can get 50,000 people out in the street. They don't play around with that. If they feel that their government is not doing the right thing, they have no problem getting out in the street. And this is why I say time and time again, the American people are incredibly propagandized. There's too many people fighting each other and saying, don't go to this thing, go to that thing. Don't have this speaker, have that speaker. And so what happens is it crushes support for it. Fewer people are going to show up. And then you have all these separate like events when you just could collaborate or consolidate and have more people. You think they're doing that in Germany? You think they're doing that in Denmark? Saying to people, no, you go do your thing over here and we're going to go do our thing over here. And we don't want to be seen with you and we don't want to be seen with. Do you see the problem? They come together on a united front. Now, I think it's important to mention, notice who they said organized the event. So you have Sarah and you have Alice Schwarzer. Now, Sarah, let's pull this up for a second so you can see. Sarah, please. Oh, no, Sarah, it's all in German. I was like, Sarah, please. I wish I could translate. I really do. And they don't have that option. But if I'm not mistaken, Sarah is a politician there. Right? So I think there's a big difference between us and Europe in the sense that our politicians, they don't participate. Most of the time, they don't show up even when they're invited or asked to. And they definitely don't lead it. And this is something that Claire Daly was talking about on the show when she came on. She said, the political leadership is also involved when it comes to the outside game. And that is the piece that we are missing here in this country. Because it's true. If we would have had Bernie Sanders or AOC or the rest of the squad, if they would have supported the marches for Medicare for All 2 years ago, we could have had thousands of people out in the street. Just supporting it, not even necessarily leading it. And then the other organizer was Alice Schwarzer, who's a journalist. So it really does matter when you have that support. Now, I have another video here that I want to show. And this is titled, Protesters Call for End of Arms Supply to Ukraine Amid Munich Security Conference. Let's go ahead and get into this. Actually, I want to turn the volume up on this one.
Was für Hohn, was für eine Perversität, ja? Partner aus, Dialog bedeutet Zwiegespräch, da gehören immer mindestens zwei. Und die Menschen in Deutschland wollen Frieden, die Menschen in Deutschland wollen keinen Krieg, die wollen auch keine Waffenlieferungen in die Ukraine und das bringen sie hier sehr deutlich zum Ausdruck. Und wir sehen es ganz deutlich, dass die USA profitieren. Sie profitieren geopolitisch, weil sie die rote Linie verschoben haben, ihre Einflusszone erweitert haben.
Let me remove the caption so you can see what he's saying because there's the English is right there at the bottom so you can see what he's saying. Okay.
Und die Menschen in Deutschland wollen Frieden, die Menschen in Deutschland wollen keinen.
He said the German people want peace over war. So these are people protesting for peace. Just like we were doing in DC. You guys see the difference when we talk about the propaganda? Let's go on.
Keine Krieg, die wollen auch keine Waffenlieferungen in die Ukraine und das bringen sie hier sehr deutlich zum Ausdruck. Und
he said they do not want to supply arms to Ukraine. Isn't this exactly what we were saying in DC? And notice how immediately the smears, if you call for peace, it's one thing to say you're cheering on Russia. It's another thing to say you want peace and you want the war to end. And for people like Rachel Maddow to smear the event, and for other people to still say, "Oh yes, you're a Putin puppet," when you're calling for peace. Let's go on.
Wir sehen es ganz deutlich, dass die USA profitieren. Sie profitieren geopolitisch, weil sie die rote Linie verschoben haben, ihre Einflusszone erweitert haben. Aber sie profitieren auch ökonomisch. Sie profitieren von den Embargos und vor allem sie profitieren von den Waffenverkäufen. Das sind ja heute.
He basically said that the United States is profiting from it. He said, like, economically, the US profits from this conflict. And Germany obviously is not. They have the energy crisis. Like a lot of these countries in Europe right now, they're hit really hard when it comes to the energy crisis because they were getting their gas from the Nord Stream pipeline, which is connected to Russia. So if you cut that off, of course they're going to be affected. Let's go on.
20 Demos in München, die meisten mit dem Thema Frieden. Die einigende, übergreifende Meinung, dass man eben nicht mit einer Kriegseskalation den Frieden erzwingt.
There were more than 20 protests in Munich that day. More than 20. And we have to beg people to come to one. They had more than 20.
I think they do not talk much about peace, just about more weapons.
Yep. There you go. Bingo. No, they're not talking about peace. Every time, all I hear them talking about is weapons and money. Give me more money. Give us more aid. Give us more this. Now, The Guardian, I was kind of surprised by this because I know their position on this conflict, but The Guardian actually, they discussed this as well. Now, let's hear how they spoke about it. And this was in Berlin. So it wasn't just the protests in Munich. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. Across the country, they were having these protests. Thousands protest in Berlin against giving weapons to Ukraine. 13,000 people gather in Brandenburg Gate. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Sorry. Okay. About 13,000 people gather at Brandenburg Gate as demonstrations also take place in other German cities. See, they don't play around. When they protest, they take it to that level. They're not playing around. They're not sitting around saying, "Who's the speaker?" Thousands of people have taken part in a demonstration in central Berlin to protest against giving more weapons to Ukraine, urging the German government to de-escalate the crisis by paving the way for negotiations with Vladimir Putin. You see that? They're asking for negotiations. Police estimate there were 13,000 people at the uprising for peace. At the Brandenburg Gate, organized by Sarah Wagenknecht, a renegade member of the Left Party, and veteran feminist campaigner Alice Schwarzer. The organizers claimed as many as 50,000 people took part. 50,000 people. And you know what's interesting, and I have to say this as someone who really loves sports, sometimes it's pretty depressing in this country that we can easily get 50,000 people, more than 50,000 people, to show up to a college football game, to show up to a college basketball game, to show up to an NBA game, an NFL game. No problem. Drop of a hat. We can get thousands of people to get in line and wait for the next new iPhone. But we can't get thousands of people to come out and protest in the streets and call for peace. even when it comes to the economic situation in this country, we talk about the class issue. With the way that inflation has been in this country, the prices being extremely high, still high for people, we should have already had thousands of people out in the street protesting over that issue alone. But this is where it's like the American mentality is just so different. It's just so different in the sense that people would rather go stand in line for hours to get into a concert, stand in line for hours to get into a game, stand in line for hours outside of a store before it even opens to get the new iPhone, but you won't show up where you don't really have to stand in a line and march in the streets with your neighbor to protest against this war. That's the problem, and that's the difference here. Let's go on. In a speech at the protest, Sarah spoke of the start of the Citizens Initiative and a starting signal for a new, strong peace movement in Germany. She said the demonstrators had been united by the fact they did not feel represented by the government of Olaf Scholz and his foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, over their decision to provide Ukraine with weapons. Let me say this again. They were united over that one issue. See how all of them were able to come together for that one issue? Let's go on. Protesters carried banners reading "Helmets today, tanks tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, your sons," in reference to the manner in which the coalition government has increased its military support for Kyiv, initially donating 5,000 helmets and more recently agreeing to send German-made Leopard tanks. Other banners read, "Not my war, not my government." Imagine, you see what I mean? They have no problem saying these things. We are like the slaves to war and the warmongers. That comes from Norbert, who's a former soldier, declining to give his surname. He held a banner reading, "The real enemy sits in the city of London and New York," a reference, he said, to the financial powers who he claimed were behind it. I have to be careful what I say. And had no interest in ending it. Germany, he said, had no right to participate in another war after the Second World War. See how they can just openly make these statements? Just openly. One man held a banner on which he said people had been numbed into accepting the war by sedative effects of the jab. Around the demonstration, loudspeakers blasted peace songs such as John Lennon's Imagine and Nina's 99 Red Balloons. A woman called Edith, carrying a large portrait of the Indian revolutionary Gandhi, said we should follow his example of nonviolent resistance to bring an end to this madness. Elsewhere, other nearby demonstrators showed sympathy for Ukraine with banners reading "Stop Putin's War" and "Help Ukraine defend itself." So you see, they showed up in the rain. A poster held by a group of anti-fascist demonstrators pointed out how Sarah had put warnings of a Russian invasion of Ukraine down to media propaganda, stating in a TV broadcast on February 20th, 2022, "We can be happy that Putin is not like he is presented as being, namely a crazy Russian nationalist who is intoxicated with the idea of shifting borders. If that was the case, the negotiations would probably be pointless." A group of Ukrainians wrapped in their country's flag outside the nearby Russian embassy held up posters and slogans including "Not delivering weapons to Ukraine is the equivalent to genocide support." So they had other people on the other side as well. Roman Overko from the Ukrainian city of Lviv, who now lives in Berlin, said the idea of negotiating is naive. How do you negotiate with such enemies of humanity? You can't talk to You can't talk to them like normal people. And he said Putin is a second Hitler. So there you go. It goes on to say a Ukrainian film director in Berlin to present his documentary Eastern Front, shot on the front line with a volunteer medics battalion, said before the demonstration, the demonstrators say they are pacifist. Well, I'm a pacifist too. But imagine someone's trying to blow your doors down. If you don't shoot back, they'll just kill you. Take all you have, rape your wife, kill your children. To make an arrangement with a clinically mad old guy makes no sense. So that's the other argument. Baerbock was singled out at the demonstration as the German member with the most responsibility for drawing Germany deeper into the conflict. Participants angrily shouted, Baerbock Ross, or Baerbock out, during and at the end of Sarah's address. Scholz and the pro-business FDP's Marie Agnes, head of Bundestag Defense Committee, who has pressured the government to deliver more military support, were also criticized. Sarah said her main motivation was to bring an end to the terrible suffering and dying in Ukraine. And this is the thing we need to talk about too, because I've mentioned this as well. The longer that this conflict continues, the more people are going to die. And we're not just talking about the people on the battlefield. We're talking about the civilian casualties as well. That's a reality with any war. That's what happens. This is why people are calling for peace. Sarah said her main, but that meant offering Russia negotiations, he said, instead of a never-ending war of attrition, whichever newer weapons. She said her childhood fears of a nuclear war in the 1980s had been revived by the current conflict. The risk of the expansion of the war across Europe and possibly the world was very big. 2 weeks ago, Sarah and Schwarzenegger had published a manifest for peace in which they urged Chancellor Scholz to stop the escalation in weapon deliveries. It has so far been signed by over 650,000 people, including prominent intellectuals and political figures. And there's something I want to add here for those who are not aware. The Green Party of Germany actually supported sending the weapons. However, when you talk to the people, the citizens of Germany, they did not want it. So the politicians went against what the actual people of Germany wanted. And that's why you have so many of them out in the streets. And yes, you heard that correctly. The Green Party of Germany. Now, I've told you before that they are also affected by the energy crisis. And what people have to understand is that it's also affecting families and businesses as well. It's not just a matter of families trying to decide, am I going to be able to pay for my heating bill? It's not just that, although that's a part of it. It's also affecting businesses. I want to share this clip here. Now, this is a family. Germany's energy crisis threatens a family-run business. So let's listen to this clip. Let's make sure it's loud enough.
It's early morning in the small town of St. Ingbert in the western German state of Saarland. Thomas Peterman and his wife are getting their butcher shop ready for the day. In Saarland, it's said that a butcher is measured against the quality of his Lyoner sausage. And the quality here has made Butcher Peterman's one of the best, not only in the state, but in the entire country for 25 years straight.
Analoch Lyoner. So, wenn ich Häken haben, ein bisschen schöner Innenräume.
This family-run business has been a proud staple in the community for the past 84 years, but Germany's energy crisis threatens to jeopardize its future. Energy usage is high here for the production and cooling of their 200 specialized meat products.
Also wir haben im Moment im letzten Jahr Elektrizität 100.000 Kilowattstunden gehabt. Ja, das ist schon so der normale Durchschnitt. Ich meine, wir müssen, wie gesagt, die Kühlmaschine laufen, das Fleisch muss gekühlt werden. Da kann man jetzt nicht sagen, wir können jetzt so irgendwas abschalten oder wir haben schon vieles umgestellt.
So they use a lot of energy, obviously, at this butcher shop because they have to keep the meat cold.
Also wir haben die ganze Beleuchtung ist LED. Dann haben wir Photovoltaik auf dem Dach. Also wir sind doch schon relativ gut aufgestellt. Aber also im Moment schon die Preisentwicklung ist schon dramatisch.
Mr. Peterman has a fixed contract for electricity for a few more months, and he has made changes designed to save energy, but his monthly electricity bill still runs upwards of €4,000.
So he's already implemented some changes to try to reduce the energy. He has the LED lights that can help some, right? So he's tried, but it's not enough. And so the reason why I wanted to show you this clip is because I want people to understand it's not just about the energy use in their homes. It's also about the energy use in these businesses. Like, do you want these businesses to have to close because they can't afford to pay the energy bill? Another reason why we need to call for peace.
Also bei anderen Kollegen, die haben schon die müssen teilweise das Doppelte zahlen. Wenn man holt, dass man so monatliche Abschlagszahlungen von 4.000 Euro haben, dann wäre das 8.000 Euro im Monat. Dann müssen wir schon überlegen, ob wir Personal entlassen oder wie wir halt weiterverfahren, dass wir überhaupt überleben können.
He is not alone. Many small and medium-sized businesses, already struggling to recoup losses from COVID-19, are being weighed down further by rising food and energy prices.
8,000 euro to US dollars is $8,441, approximately $8,441. So that's what he said. I just want you guys to understand what that is in US dollars.
Hat sich wesentlich erhöht dieses Jahr. Also die Bauern brauchen besser, ist der Diesel viel teurer geworden. Und somit ist Fleisch und die Futtermittel alles viel teurer geworden. Das Fleisch, kann man sagen, hat sich fast verdoppelt. Und wir merken halt auch, dass der Kunde zurückhaltend ist, weil die Leute halt auch selbst wenig Geld haben.
According to the International Monetary Fund, rising energy costs alone slashed the average German household's total spending power in 2022 by 4%. Mr. Peterman's wife, Sabine, who works at the front of the shop, says she sees the impact.
Ja, man merkt schon, dass die Kundschaft halt zurückhaltender ist beim Einkauf, ne? Dass sie halt weniger kaufen, ne? Wie vorher. Und auch weniger hierher kommen. Ich denke, die gehen dann eher wieder so Richtung Supermarkt, weil es dort halt günstiger ist, ne? Durch die
Yeah, so people are starting to gravitate towards the supermarkets instead of going to the butcher shop like they normally would because of the prices. The prices are cheaper at the supermarkets. Now the quality is better at the butcher shop. So they're already starting to lose business. This war affects everybody. Like it doesn't matter if you own a business or not, but especially over there. Because the inflation rate, I have to double check, but last time I checked, the inflation rate in the UK was like 10.4%. So it's affecting everyone.
Angebote dort.
Germany's Federal Statistics Office says that since Berlin began cutting the country's dependence on cheap Russian energy, gas prices for non-household customers, such as businesses the size of Mr. Peterman's butcher shop, have increased nearly 39%, while electricity has gone up 19%.
39% for gas prices, 19% for electricity. So those are the increases there.
The problem is that energy alternatives are not cheap. To keep up with demand while it builds up its own renewable energy infrastructure, Germany has had to import gas and oil from more expensive sources, passing those costs, in part, on to the customer.
Ja gut, ich meine, ich kann das nachvollziehen, dass man da irgendwelche Sanktionen machen muss. Aber dass unser Gas jetzt so verknappt wird, dass bei uns der ganze Mittelstand irgendwo vor die Hunde geht. Also ich weiß von einigen Firmen, die jetzt zusperren müssen. Das bringt uns auch nicht weiter. Also wir müssen langsam mal unserem eigenen.
So he said he knows companies that have already had to close. And he even mentioned mid-size, like the medium-sized businesses, not just the small ones.
Volk gucke und ist ja gut, dass man überall helfen wolle oder sonst irgendwas, aber irgendwann ist es halt Armut am Ende. Also es geht mittlerweile bei uns in unserem deutschen Mittelstand um die Existenz und das kann man nicht mehr so ganz nachvollziehen.
So people who are still advocating for this is why I'm telling you, like, this is a problem. This is a problem. I'm going to go to this comment. Mark says, same here in the UK. Any MP arranging a rally would be expelled or at least suspended from the party. So there you go. I mean, how far is this going to go? How far is this going to go? You go from the pandemic and businesses having to close because of that. You go from that and then you go to this, like the inflation, the energy crisis. It's ridiculous when you really think about it. Now, how much is this going to cost Germany in the end? How much is this conflict going to cost Germany? Let's see. Okay, so Germany is one of the front runners, at least in Europe, that is sending aid. And it says, however, the Ukraine war will cost the German economy around 160 billion euros by the end of 2023. So that is 160 billion euros. That is equivalent to, why didn't you just do this for me? Why didn't you just do that? Like, why you had to make it like this? 160 billion. Why is it not doing this? This converter thing is a mess. Somebody may have already said in the chat. Sorry, for some reason, my this converter sucks. Let me go to the other one. Sorry. 160 billion euros to dollars. It's 168. Oh, it's more here. It's like 168 billion US dollars. Wait a minute. Yeah. Wait, did they do that right? I don't think they calculated that right. Let me go to this thing. Did they do? No, they did that by million. I don't know why they did by millions. I said billion. I said billion. Sorry. Sorry, guys. Hold on. They keep changing it to billion or million on here. I don't know why. Anyway, okay, here we go. 168 billion US dollars. That's coming from the German Chambers of Industry and Commerce. So they went ahead and rounded up to $171 billion, is around 4% of its gross domestic output. And for people who are not aware, Germany typically had a strong economy. At least they did when I lived there. So this can crush them. That's what I'm saying. Like when people say fight to the last Ukrainian, like at what cost? Because when you fight to the last Ukrainian, that means you're willing to fight until everyone's dead, and you're willing to fight until these other countries are bankrupt. At what cost? This is why we need to call for peace. Approximately $171 billion. See? It will affect the GDP capita of Europe's largest economy. $40% more for energy needs. Yes, they relied on cheap gas. I can turn the sound off as there's nothing being said there. The war in Ukraine has pushed Germany to opt for alternative gas suppliers. The German citizens are going to embrace for the impact of the ongoing war. See? This is what I really want people to see, and I want more people to talk about this. Like, what is it actually going to cost them in the end when this is all said and done? Very crazy. Very crazy. Screen Art says, like the music, you liked it. Mikiko, people in the US now must be afraid to be tagged as domestic terrorists if going to protest. That's another possibility as well. But I've been seeing this across the board for quite a while, though, Miko, with other issues as well. Thank you for the super chat, TC Blondie. How about a live interview with Roger Meadows? Roger does not want to come on camera, on stream. I've talked to him about this. James says nonviolent resistance shows who the bad guys are. Thank you for the super chat, Aisha. Sending love to you and your viewers, Sabby. Never stop exposing the psychopaths who run the world, who run our world. Thank you so much for that. Angela said, saw you and JB on Morpheus show earlier. That's right. That's right. Thank you for the super chat laugh. I'm in Europe. We have a folk memory. It passes down generations. We all have relatives that died in war. Everyone in Europe has been attacked in war. We know war is evil. The US should not assume they are immune. That's right. And I know about it as well. I mean, my family was military. I know people who went to Iraq and didn't come back. And thank you for the super sticker, Melissa. Peace. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. But you're right. The problem is the majority, since the Vietnam War, with the exception of the Vietnam War, the majority of Americans are not directly affected. Just as Laugh was just saying, that they've all been impacted by it. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. But this is why I keep saying we need to call for peace. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, JVB. You just get better and better, Sabby. Thank you for these bits of sanity. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. Yeah, Brian, I'm surprised by that too. Brian said, I'm surprised Germany has not called out the US for the Nord Stream unless not true. I'm surprised too. I'm surprised too. Wonder if they've seen that article yet. Or maybe they had, and like media just doesn't want us to see that they have. Okay. Speaking of controversy here. Malcolm X's family is doing something that I think is long overdue. So I applaud them in their efforts to get this to happen. Malcolm X's family has announced that they are filing a lawsuit against the NYPD, the FBI, and the CIA for the assassination of Malcolm X. Now, before we get into the lawsuit, I want to remind you what transpired 2 years ago when it was revealed that the two men that were charged for killing Malcolm X, they actually received a pardon 2 years ago. Now, one of them had already passed away, but they received a pardon. And why did they receive that pardon? Well, because an NYPD officer named Raymond Wood decided to write a letter of confession on his deathbed about the assassination of Malcolm X. Now, before we get into the lawsuit, let's go back to that moment when all was revealed. And now some of you probably had your suspicions about this all along, but it was just 2 years ago that it was actually confirmed. So let's go ahead and get started with that announcement first. And then, if you can, be so kind to go ahead and hit that like button. That helps me with the algo, and we'll get into this.
Restorative justice to try to have those Black leaders, those civil rights activists who were wrongfully convicted over 50 years ago, to have them exonerated.
After Ray's passing, I found a confession letter that Ray had written and mailed to my father back in 2011. This letter details the FBI, and the NYPD's involvement in the assassination of Malcolm X, and how he was forced to betray his people. This letter helps me to understand the pain and guilt that Ray felt for the last 55 years. He conspired to help the NYPD assassinate Malcolm X.
Gonna pause there for just a second. So for those just joining, he is getting into the letter that came from Raymond Wood. He was a former NYPD officer who apparently partnered with the FBI to take down Malcolm X, to take out Malcolm X. And on his deathbed 2 years ago, he released this letter confessing that. Now, it would have been great if he would have confessed this when those two men were wrongfully charged. So again, even though they were exonerated, one of them had already passed away by the time that this confession came to light.
On behalf of Ray, he wanted the world to know that he is deeply sorry. I hope that this information helps the Sabs family, to more clearly understand what happened to their father on that horrible day. As a Black man, I am disgusted to know that what happened 60 years ago is still going on today. We are living under J. Edgar Hoover's Jim Crow system of policing our Black and brown people. He is the architect of these constant injustices and tactics against our people.
And this is one of the reasons why people call for abolishing the FBI.
I am now going to give a copy of this letter to the Sabs family. I intend to give a copy of this letter to Khalil Saeed's family, Walter Bowe's family, Thomas Johnson's family, Herb Collander's family, and Afeni Shakur's family. These are the families of individuals that I am aware of who have been falsely convicted due to Ray's actions.
So that was—
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org.
That was approximately 2 years ago when they announced that shocking evidence. I don't know why. I do not like this system, this new system. I don't know why it automatically plays. Sorry. Okay. So now the family has decided to take action. And I want to remind you what happened also 2 years ago after that letter was revealed. One of Malcolm X's daughters died. She was found dead in her apartment. And so at that point, I remember I reported this story. At that point, some people were asking, like, wait a minute now. It is a little strange that they found one of his daughters dead in her apartment right after that letter was released. So I just want to remind you of that. So the family has decided to file a lawsuit. Let's get into that.
We're following breaking news out of New York City now. Attorney Ben Crump is suing the city's police department and other government agencies. He claims they covered up evidence connected to the assassination of civil rights leader Malcolm X. NBC News digital reporter Maya Eaglin is following that story for us and joins us now. So Maya, what specifically is Crump alleging here?
Hey, Aaron, this all comes exactly 58 years since the assassination of Malcolm X in Washington Heights, New York. He was killed while addressing his organization of Afro-American Unity in 1965. Now, as you mentioned, his family and civil rights attorney Ben Crump announced today that they plan on suing the NYPD and other government agencies for the circumstances surrounding the murder. The wrongful death lawsuit alleges that factual evidence was concealed from the family and from the men convicted of the crimes in the assassination. Malcolm X's family is now suing for $100 million. Here's more of what one of Malcolm X's daughters had to say in Manhattan today.
So they're suing for over $100 million. Let's go on.
For years, our family has fought for the truth to come to light concerning his murder, and we'd like our father to receive the justice that he deserves.
Attorney Ben Crump also said they intend to take depositions from people involved who are still alive. Aaron.
And Maya, the role these agencies played in his death has been really a matter of dispute for decades, right?
I want you to pay attention to the vocabulary that's being used here. This is 122. Let's go back to the beginning because I noticed they do something multiple times during this segment. Listen to this. Let me put up the captions. Watch this.
We're following breaking news out of New York City now. Attorney Ben Crump is suing the city's police department and other government agencies. He claims
the city's police department and other government agencies. That's the first time. Now, let's fast forward here to one right about here. Pay attention to this.
Justice that he deserves.
Attorney Ben Crump also said they intend to take depositions from people involved who are still alive. Aaron.
And Maya, the role these agencies played in his death.
2. Notice he said the role these agencies. Notice he doesn't name them. That's twice. That's twice that he's done that. Let's try it again. Let's go on. There's more.
Has been really a matter of dispute for decades, right?
That's right. There are a ton of theories and documentaries and reports about this assassination. You might remember about a year and a half ago, 2 of the men who were convicted in connection with the murder of Malcolm X were exonerated. They had always maintained their innocence, but spent decades in prison. Sadly, one of the men passed away in 2009, but the city of New York settled lawsuits filed on their behalf, agreeing to pay $36 million. A lot of new developments here, so we'll continue staying on top of this case as it unfolds. Aaron.
Maya Eaglin for us today. Maya, thank you.
Notice how he wouldn't say what the agencies were. Notice how he said these agencies. The agencies are the FBI and the CIA. So he could name the police department, but he couldn't name the agencies. Intentional or a coincidence? Just certain things that I pay attention to. Just name them. Say what it is. I'm sorry, but let's just go there. Now, NPR did cover this. Let's go ahead and get into this article because I sincerely hope more outlets are going to cover this issue as well. Malcolm X's family is suing the CIA, FBI, and NYPD. Notice they had no problem telling you who the agencies are. No problem. So there's his daughter there. I'm going to make this a little bit larger because it's at a press conference on Tuesday. Malcolm X's daughter, along with civil rights, I hate this stupid thing here, along with civil rights attorney Ben Crump, announced plans to file a $100 million wrongful death lawsuit against the NYPD, the FBI, and the CIA and other government agencies. When I think of the challenges that my mother suffered witnessing the assassination of her husband, I think now is the best time that we have to seek justice for a man who gave his life for human rights. That's coming from his daughter. We'd like our father to receive the justice that he deserves. So you guys see, it's just time and time again. You had these suspicions. I think a lot of us had these suspicions. We kind of figured this is what happened, but we didn't have any proof. Then you come out with the proof. Let's go on. This week marks the 58th anniversary of the assassination of the civil rights leader. Decades of questions remain about what really happened at the Audubon Ballroom in Upper Manhattan after several men shot the 39-year-old Malcolm X 21 times at a rally. Crump claims the agencies fraudulently concealed evidence from the family. So this is the first problem that you have. They concealed evidence from the family. He says pursuing legal action is not just about holding those who pulled the trigger accountable, but all the entities that conspired to make it happen. The government had factual and exculpatory information that they kept from the gentlemen who were wrongly convicted, and more importantly, from his family. That's coming from Ben Crump. The two men Crump mentioned, Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam, were exonerated in 2021 after being wrongly convicted of the 1965 assassination. He poses the question, the city, New York City, and the state paid tens of millions of dollars to the two gentlemen who were wrongly convicted. What is due to those who suffered the most? Shabazz says this case is about painting an accurate history and preserving her father's legacy. She laments that the circumstances leading to his death are unresolved and that the trauma that happened in the ballroom all those years ago still stings. Crump compares the circumstances surrounding Malcolm X's death to other Black liberation leaders such as MLK and Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party, citing the surveillance of former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Let's talk about J. Edgar Hoover for a second. J. Edgar Hoover, yes, you should implicate him because this was under his leadership of the FBI. Not only going after Fred Hampton, not only going after MLK, not only going after Malcolm X, but also the McCarthyism smears. There was a debate as to whether or not J. Edgar's name should be removed from buildings. And I think back to the movie that I saw about J. Edgar Hoover's life. Now, Leonardo DiCaprio played J. Edgar Hoover. I don't know if you guys have seen this movie or not. It's a good movie. But it did not portray J. Edgar Hoover for the ass that he really was. I'm just going to put it to you that way. Because it didn't mention this. So you have to understand that this happened under J. Edgar Hoover's leadership. Make sure, for those of you who have kids, make sure you tell that to your kids. Because a lot of the schools, the education system, when they do talk about J. Edgar Hoover in the classroom, it's in a positive way. Let's go on. Kill Your Gorger said Leo gained 40 pounds for that role. Yeah, that is true. The families of King and Hampton were both compensated following successful lawsuits. They, the government, were afraid of the rise of a Black Messiah. That's coming from Ben Crump. News of the pending lawsuit follows the release of a letter allegedly written. No, there was no alleged. You can't say allegedly no more. That's already been proven. Written by the late NYPD officer Raymond Wood before he died in 2020. The letter states that he participated in the plot to kill Malcolm by infiltrating his organization and luring his security team into committing criminal acts so that they could be arrested days before the assassination. He wrote, I participated in actions that in hindsight were deplorable and detrimental to my own Black people. And this is what they do. And they did this with Fred Hampton as well. They didn't find a white guy to infiltrate the Black Panthers. They didn't find a white guy to infiltrate Malcolm X's organization, the Black Muslim community. No. What do? They use one of your own. They get another Black guy to infiltrate the Black Panthers. They find another Black guy to infiltrate Malcolm X's organization. Because they know, okay, they're one of me. I will trust this person. That's what they do. Let's go on. The FBI has yet to make a public statement on the matter. Of course not. You know, you guys are under a lot of scrutiny later between the Twitter files and this. NPR reached out to the CIA and the NYPD and both declined to comment. I'm sure they did. Shabazz, now 60, was just 2 years old when she witnessed her father's murder. She watched with 3 of her sisters and pregnant mother, Betty Shabazz, as one of the most notorious murders of the civil rights movement unfolded. That's right, Papa. Today, the FBI and CIA are doing the same to the right as the left rejoices. So kind of hypocritical for people to act surprised regarding the FBI and the CIA killing Malcolm X and many more. And also people trying to join forces together, like left and right trying to join forces together on issues that they agree with. When I say a lot of these people are ill for, every organization that I've seen has had some type of infiltration. So there you go. So I sincerely hope that Malcolm X's family gets justice. I sincerely hope they win this. Doesn't bring Malcolm X back, no, but I sincerely hope they get some kind of justice here. I really do. It's a step. It's a step. And for the love of God, Ben Crump is everywhere. I don't know how this guy's in all these different states more than 1 week. Like, he is everywhere. If there is a civil rights issue or injustice, Ben Crump is there. That used to be Al Sharpton, but Al's cool now. Al, you know, he ain't trying to get out there no more like he used to. Al is like, I got this cushy job at MSNBC. I am not trying to hit the streets. Not the way that he used to. I'll take the comment on Rockfin Eric. Danny said Ben is chasing the money. Apollo Creed's young nephew said Ben Crump is an op too. Oh, man. Oh, my gosh. Thank you for the tip, Dominique. When we are frustrated over bad political decisions, we should be reminded about something we already know. We have no voice in political decisions after elections. This is because we let our politicians make all of the political decisions for us, which has led to our public servants becoming our political rulers. Learn how to stop making public servants your rulers. Independentvoter.org. And Eric, if you can put that link in the chat. I am so sorry, Wayne. The FBI came to my career day in high school. I'm sorry. I feel for you. I'm like Shaka Khan right now. I feel for you. I really do. That's a hot mess. I'm going to go to some of the comments and then we'll get to the next story. Thank you for the super sticker, Baba Daga Forest Dweller. How did you get your font to change like that? I don't know how to do that on YouTube. That's interesting. Thanks for the super chat, Zach. How much more are we going to sacrifice for the gym teacher looking clown? What? Oh, wait. How much more are we going to sacrifice for the gym teacher looking clown Zelensky? Sheesh. Damn. JB, the Black community knew it was these institutions that assassinated him. This is just confirmation. That's right. Joe, JFK, RFK, MLK, Malcolm X, and many other leaders of the 60s and 70s and 80s have been murdered by the U.S. government, especially if bribery doesn't work. Thank you for the super chat, Mark. Sabby Sabs, Roger Meadows could do like Zoya is Love. She's never on camera when she's on RBN. Just an idea. I did present that option to him. I don't think he was feeling it. Thank you for the super chat, NK. You got to read the FBI's war on Tupac Shakur. Well researched, and it gives you a true sense of the FBI. Bingo. Thank you for the super chat, Laugh. There is not a village in Scotland, however small, that does not have a monument to those who died in the first disgusting world war. And thank you for the super chat, Coca-Cola. Thank you, Sabby, so much for what you do. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. We are moving on to the Jimmy Dore and Tucker Carlson interview clip here. Now, I want to preface this by saying, think about what we just said in reference to Germany and people rising up in Germany to call for peace against this war, and in reference to this being a money grab. Think about that and how the economy over there is being affected. And I want you to listen to what Jimmy Dore says on Tucker Carlson here. Now, I think he hit it out of the park. So Jimmy retweeted this and said, "Why is Tucker Carlson the only corporate news show to allow me to bring on an anti-war message and tell the truth about Ukraine? You're being lied to about Ukraine, and by the exact same people who lied to us, who lied us into Iraq, Libya, Syria, etc. America is the world's terrorist." Let's remember all these countries: Iraq, Libya, and Syria. And this is a good question. Why is it that you can only have this conversation on Tucker Carlson's show? You know, a lot of people give him and others criticism for going on to Tucker Carlson's show. But what I would ask is, why isn't MSNBC and CNN allowing people like Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate to come on to those outlets to have this discussion about the war between Russia and Ukraine? Or just to come on, period. Because they don't let them come on at all. You can add Glenn Greenwald to that list. They don't let him come on either. So that's a question. Something to think about. Why is it only he will let you come on and have that message? Let's go on. So listen to this clip here of Jimmy Dore on Tucker Carlson's show. Here we go.
A tiny cabal of people have control of our government, and they're using it to do war for economic profit. You know what the difference between our mafia state now, back then, the mafia helped defeat the Nazis back then. Now we're actually arming Nazis. You know, and isn't it just like America to ignore the Nazis that are suffering here at home trying to buy eggs while we fund Nazis in other countries? It's unbelievable what's happening. This is really about World War III. And why aren't they investigating it? No, they won't even ask them a question. You know, Cy Hirsch's article came out detailing how they all blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And the American press won't even ask the people he named in that article a question about it. They won't ask Victoria Nuland. They won't ask Jess Sullivan. They won't ask Anthony Blinken. In fact, those people won't even give a statement about it. You know who will talk about it? Kirby, the press secretary at the White House. Because I'm sure the people who did the investigations have a pipeline right to Kirby, but not to Anthony Blinken, not to Sullivan, not Victoria Nuland. By the way, these are the same people who lied us into the Iraq War, lied to us about Libya, lied to us about Syria, dropped so many bombs in Syria they ran out of bombs. They're doing the same thing. America is the world's terrorist. We have 400 military bases surrounding China. We provoked this by people don't know that the CIA got in bed with the right-wing Nazis in Ukraine to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine in 2014. We had a peace deal. It was called the Minsk Accord. And then they violated. Who violated it? Ukraine kept shelling the Donbass, which are the Russian speakers in the eastern part of the Ukraine. And that's why Putin had to be provoked to invade to protect those people. Nobody will tell you that. Everybody who talks about every other news station, by the way, you're the only one doing this. And I applaud you for letting people come out and tell the truth about what's actually happening in Ukraine. Other stations, when I watch, what they do is they start the history of Ukraine from Putin's invasion. They never tell you that we overthrew their democratically elected government in 2014. They never tell you that they didn't stop shelling the people in the Donbass. They never abided by the Minsk Accord. They don't tell you that the former German prime minister said that the reason why they did the Minsk Accords in the first place was so that Ukraine could build up their military to get ready for this war that they're provoking.
Whew. There's a lot said there. So I think like that was a lot. I was like, I don't even know if I can talk that fast, that quickly, but I do want to go back over this again because there were a couple things that were said that I do want to comment on that I think is important for people to understand. First of all, this first part here is obviously a joke. I need to say that because some people will take it and they'll clip it and make it seem like he's serious about the whole Nazi thing.
A tiny cabal of people have control of our government, and they're using it to do war for economic profit.
A tiny group of people. This is the same thing that Richard Wolff has complained about. Why is it that so few can make those decisions for so many? Tiny few can make the decisions that affect so many people, and none of us have a seat at the table. None of us are in the room when these decisions are being made. None of them.
You know, the difference between our mafia state now back then, the mafia helped defeat the Nazis back then. Now we're actually arming Nazis. You know, and isn't it just like America?
And I have to say something about that statement too. I get really sick and tired of people trying to pretend like there is no Nazification over there. That's not true. There is. I mean, you can look at the pictures. Look at the pictures online for yourself, people. Look at the videos and stuff online for yourself. Look at it. Talk to people from the country. Talk to people from the country. Zoya, who comes on RBN often, Zoya has explained this. She's from there. She knows. So it's just really interesting to me as if like people aren't even willing to do their own research to see if it's even true. You could put the video and the pictures like right in front of people and they say, oh, it's only a few people. No, it's not. It's not just a few. You see the symbols across the freaking country. What are they talking about? And to sit back here and to hear and listen to other left independent media commentators try to make excuses for the Nazification and try to pretend like it's not an issue, it's bullshit. It's absolutely terrible. And some of them are doing it. Or they're saying, oh, it's just a few of them, not that many. Liars. Liars they are. Now, 5 years from now, 5 to 17 years from now, watch it all come out in the open. Someone's going to write a book about it and make a lot of money off of it. I bet you. Then it'll be okay to admit it. That's how these wars work. I watched this. We watched it happen with Iraq. We watched it happen with Afghanistan. So come on. And I can't believe that people would fall for this again.
To ignore the Nazis that are suffering here at home trying to buy eggs while we fund Nazis in other countries.
So obviously that is a joke. And I'm saying that because, again, people will clip that and make it seem like it's something that it's not.
It's unbelievable what's happening. This is really about World War III. And why aren't they investigating it? No, they won't even ask them a question. You know, Cy Hirsch's article came out detailing how they all blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And the American press won't even ask the people he named in that article a question.
Right. So let's talk about this for a second. The White House response to that article was that is utterly false and complete fiction. That was the response. I read it on the show. Really? Who would I believe here, people? Who would I believe? Joe Biden, who's a habitual liar? Or would I believe Seymour Hersh, a Pulitzer Prize journalist? And I don't mean a journalist that just came about 10 years ago. The same guy who uncovered situations with the Vietnam War, the same guy who covered Richard Nixon. This is a journalist who's been around for decades. So who you want to believe? You want to believe Seymour, or do you want to believe Jim Crow Joe? The same guy who lied about marching with civil rights leaders. Come on, man.
Question about it. They won't ask Victoria Nuland. They won't ask Jess Sullivan. They won't ask Anthony Blinken. In fact, those people won't even give a statement about it. You know who will talk about it? Kirby, the press secretary at the White House. Because I'm sure the people who did the investigations have a pipeline right to Kirby, but not to Anthony Blinken, not to Sullivan, not Victoria Nuland. By the way, these are the same people who lied us into the Iraq war, lied to us about Libya, lied to us about Syria, dropped so many bombs in Syria they ran out of bombs. They're doing the same thing. America is the world's terrorist. We have 400 military bases surrounding China. We provoke this by people don't know that the CIA got in bed with the right-wing Nazis in Ukraine to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine in 2014.
They're not even talking about 2014 because mainstream media isn't talking about it or held off talking about it for as much as they could. They're not talking about this goes back over 8 years. They're not talking about the letter that I showed you on this show, which Ro Khanna signed, Hakeem Jeffries signed, the letter that was released in April 2018 of congressmen calling out the fact that they were deeply concerned about the rise of Nazification in Ukraine and Poland. Hakeem Jeffries signed that letter. By the way, the next time one of you go to these events to ask Hakeem Jeffries about this war, you should have a printed copy of that letter. His signature is on it, clear as day. And ask him, if that's not the case, Representative Jeffries, why did you sign this letter written back in 2018, which says that you were deeply concerned about the rise of Nazification in Ukraine and Poland? Not enough people were talking about that letter. Not enough people.
We had a peace deal. It was called the Minsk Accord. And then they violated. Who violated it? Ukraine kept shelling the Donbass, which are the Russian speakers in the eastern part of the Ukraine. And that's why Putin had to be provoked to invade to protect those people. Nobody will tell you that. Everybody who talks about every other news station, by the way, you're the only one doing this. And I applaud you for letting people come out and tell the truth about what's actually happening in Ukraine. Other stations, when I watch, what they do is they start the history of Ukraine from Putin's invasion. They never.
Yes, they do. And see, that's the thing. I've noticed that too. As if 2014 didn't even happen. Like what? Now, I told you a couple nights ago, Chris Hedges actually claims that it actually goes all the way back to the fall of the Berlin Wall when that agreement was made that NATO would not extend. And NATO decided to extend anyway. So Chris Hedges would actually argue it goes all the way back to the fall of the Berlin Wall. I mean, I don't know what else to tell people. I really don't know what else to tell you. You have to do your own research when it comes to the history of these situations and not just listen to what mainstream media is saying without looking at what happened before those events. That is incredibly important, especially when you're talking about war.
Tell you that we overthrew their democratically elected government in 2014. They never tell you that they didn't stop shelling the people in the Donbass. They never abided by the Minsk Accord. They don't tell you that the former German prime minister said that the reason why they did the Minsk Accords in the first place was so that Ukraine could build up their military to get ready for this war that they're provoking.
In other words, this was coming. It's been a long time coming. And more people should be calling for peace. That's what more people should be calling for. But again, there's no profit in peace. There is profit in war. And people really have to understand that. Go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat. Chango Roaring Lion. We must not forget Muma Abu Jamal, #free Mumia. That's right. Snake Man Mark, Jimmy Dore, Christian Smalls, Glenn Greenwald, etc., all smeared for going on Tucker, the only corporate media platform that would have them on. Yep. Razal the Great, Jimmy is doing what the bread tubers who criticize him never do, speak truth to an audience. Angela, watching Jimmy come on there and get as many words out as possible in the few minutes they give him is gold. I know. I don't know if I could say all that quickly. I don't think he came up for air for a second. I was like, yeah, because they don't give you much time. They don't give you much time when you go on there. So if you got something to say, you got to get that out. JB, when the wall fell, the cannons rose. There you go. There you go. But there needs to be a call for peace. Mastermind said Jimmy figured out how to talk and do circular breathing at the same time. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. All right. We're going to finish up here. You guys know we have been covering why does that look like that? YouTube shorts suck ass. Whoops. Sorry about that. You guys really weren't supposed to hear that. Anywho, it's just because of the vertical videos. It's the way it fits on the screen. Anyway, all this month, we have been covering a featured person in Black history. And I hope that I've been mixing this up pretty well to introduce you to people that you may not be as familiar with. And this time around, some of you might be familiar with him, especially if you were around during a particular launch. So today's feature is, let me go ahead and share my picture here. And I have two videos I want to show of him. I happen to know quite a bit about this individual. But today's Black History Month feature is Ron McNair. Now, some of you, if you're kind of young, you may not be familiar with Ron McNair. But some of us remember him, and unfortunately not for the best reason. I'll get to that in just a second. But Ron McNair was an astronaut. He went to MIT. In fact, if you go to MIT, I used to work in the physics department there. In the physics department at MIT, there's this big giant picture of Ron McNair. And someone says sideburns. Yeah, sideburns. And awesome, awesome guy who unfortunately his life was cut too short. Too short. Now, he did something very special because he was an astronaut, but he wasn't just an astronaut. We're going to start off with this clip here, and then I have another clip I want to show you.
You should never give up too early.
As well.
The Palmetto State has produced numerous astronauts and scientists, including NASA astronaut and physicist Dr. Ronald McNair. Born in Lake City, South Carolina, Ronald McNair graduated in 1971 from Carolina A&T with a bachelor's degree in physics. He continued his studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, graduating with a master's degree in laser physics in 1976. After school, McNair became an astronaut at NASA. In 1984, McNair served as a mission specialist on the Space Shuttle Challenger. McNair operated Challenger's robotic arm to help astronaut Bruce McCandless conduct his historic untethered spacewalk. This role on the 1984 mission made McNair the second African American to go into space. McNair was killed in the tragic explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger in January of 1986 during flight STS-51L. The Palmetto State has produced.
Yeah, it's really sad. Unfortunately, like I said, he was an astronaut, but most people know about him because he was one of the astronauts that was on the Challenger. And for the younger peeps in the chat, I see you, Sebastian. What's the Challenger? I'm going to show you in just a second. The Challenger, it blew up. And this event was actually watched live. So there were teachers that actually showed this launch in the classroom because this was like a big deal, right? So this was in the 80s. And okay, that should be at 5:14. Let me see. Sorry, I'm trying to get this ready. This was in the 80s. In fact, if you watch the show called This Is Us, they actually referenced the Challenger quite a bit. But it was a big deal during that time. So you just have to imagine a teacher showing this in her classroom, this launch, and all of a sudden it just blows up. Why is this auto playing? I hate that it does this. Okay. All right, let's try this again. So here's a little bit more information about that.
And then they flew out about 50 meters and tested them. And Ron McNair took that very famous shot that we see.
I'm sorry. The volume is so... I'll put that there. Sorry, guys. I have to wind it back just a little bit so I can make it louder.
McCandless and Bob Stewart took the manned maneuvering units out and tested those units without umbilicals. They tested them in the payload bay, and then they flew out about 50 meters and tested them. And Ron McNair took that very famous shot that we see of Bruce McCandless out there in deep space.
Why don't we zip them up? About right? About half-mast. Okay, good.
I just want to pause it here because these were all of the astronauts that were part of the Challenger. And by the way, there was also a teacher. And that's what I think some people don't understand, that it wasn't just like everybody was just like this experienced like astronaut, so to speak. There was a teacher.
Ron McNair's second mission was again on the Space Shuttle Challenger in January of 1986.
What I'll do is introduce the next crew member, and we'll just go down the line and let everybody say a little.
We look forward to launching from the Cape, first of all, and returning here a few days later. I had the privilege of being a part of the crew a couple of years ago that made the first landing here at the Cape, and I intend to be a part of the crew to make the first return landing to the Cape in about a week.
6,
We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
1986.
Shortly after liftoff, a failure in the O-ring seal on a solid rocket booster led to a catastrophic explosion, resulting in the loss of the vehicle and crew.
The best we can do is remember our 7 astronauts, our Challenger 7. Remember them as they lived, bringing life and love and joy to those who knew them, and pride to a nation.
Yeah, this was a big deal, you guys. Like, you got to understand again that, like, teachers showed the launch in their classrooms to their students. So when the Challenger exploded, the students in the classroom saw that happen. So this is a big deal. And Eric said, teacher Krista McAuliffe died in the accident. Yeah, like I said, there was a teacher that was one of them as well. So it's unfortunate. Like, they did test out the equipment. I want to do like more research about the Challenger, to be honest with you, because they did test out the equipment beforehand, but something went incredibly wrong there.
They came from all parts of this great country, from South Carolina to Washington State, Ohio to Mohawk, New York, Hawaii to North Carolina, to Concord, New Hampshire.
Well, I think when you think about the legacy of Ronald McNair, you really have to look at the Challenger accident itself, because that's become part of our cultural memory. If you were around at that point and you ask someone, where were you when the Challenger accident happened, it's kind of like a Kennedy moment. People remember where they were and what they were doing at that point.
We saw this, liftoff, and then this plume, and we were just stunned. And we hoped that what we saw wasn't real, but we knew all too soon that it was real, and that Ron and his 7 crew members had been just suddenly taken from us. He and the rest of the crew were personal friends of mine, and that kind of loss and sacrifice is something you never forget.
Ron McNair is remembered in so many different ways. He's remembered by the renaming of schools, the memorial out at Arlington Cemetery, the Challenger Centers, for instance, that were established by the Challenger families after the Challenger accident. Their mission continues to live on through the Challenger Centers that were established.
25 years after that fateful day that we lost the Challenger and her crew, people gathered in Lake City, South Carolina to dedicate the Dr. Ronald E. McNair Life History Center. Originally the public library that had denied Ron those books because of his skin color. It is now a place of learning, reflection, and celebration of a hero who still inspires generations today.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, tonight's spotlight feature is, again, Ron McNair. And if you are ever here visiting in the Boston area and you get a chance to do a tour of MIT, definitely ask them if you can see what they have in reference to Ron McNair. It's unfortunate. It is really unfortunate. It really is. What's that, Hitflix? They said the capsule was intact when it hit the water, so they may not have immediately died in the explosion. I've heard that too. I've heard that they may not have died like actually at that point. And Hitflix says the O-rings in the boosters failed because of ice. Janice says, I remember watching it live my sophomore year of high school. Gemini, Sabby, my science teacher in Portland, Connecticut high school, was a candidate for that shuttle until they found a heart murmur and it disqualified him. He was devastated. Then that happened. Holy crap. Red Scary. I remember the Challenger disaster when I was in the 6th grade. Sorry. JB goes, I was only 2 when it happened. Jonathan said, that's right. He's an HBCU alumni, NC and NCA&T State University. Put some respect on it. That's right. He went there first and he went to MIT afterwards. Sebastian said, I love attending this because I learn about Black history. Yeah, I'm trying to present people to you that I feel like you may not already know about, instead of the same people like MLK and Rosa Parks and all that kind of stuff. I try to present someone different to you. So that is Ron McNair. And that is it for me today, guys. I am definitely over time. I do have to skedoodle. So I hope you guys have a great Sunday evening. And I'm not live tomorrow. I'm not live on Mondays. I'll be back Tuesday night with some goodies for you. But other than that, guys, I do have to get going. Deuces. All right. You guys know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.